Welcome back. Today we're diving into the top 5 Danish Gambit traps. Sharp, aggressive ideas to catch your opponents off guard and score quick wins. Let's jump right in. We start with pawn to e4, pawn to e5, and then pawn to d4, attacking the pawn on e5. Black captures on d4, then we play pawn to c3, offering another pawn, and black accepts it. Next we play bishop to c4, developing a piece. If black captures the pawn on b2, we then play bishop to b2. Now we have two powerful, active bishops. From here, black play knight to f6. They usually develop their kingside pieces, aiming to castle quickly. I am going to show you the main line, which perfectly illustrates some of the key attacking patterns in this opening. So, let's say black develops their bishop, also pinning your knight. You continue developing, and at this point, as often happens, black will be annoyed by your pawn pushing forward and chasing away their knight from f6. One of the easiest solutions for black seems to be to simply capture this pawn while making use of the pin. But now, as you castle, your knight is free to move, and therefore the central knight of black is hanging. Black wants to trade it off, but the beauty of the position is that you are already winning. There is no way back for black. For example, if black castles, you go knight to d5, striking and attacking the bishop, but also opening up a diagonal for your bishop. And now your opponent is going to learn the power of your two Danish bishops the hard way. You play knight to f6 check against the king. Notice that the knight is guarded by the bishop. For this reason, black cannot capture it with the queen, because that would lose the queen. Otherwise, capturing would open up the king to direct attack. From here, you just continue attacking with checks. Then queen to h4 takes aim at the pawn on f6. You are threatening to capture it with a double attack against the king and the queen. Bishop to a7 is forced, trying to guard the pawn. But now, bishop to d3 finally overpowers black. Queen takes h7 is coming, and there is no way for black to cover this diagonal. He cannot push the pawn forward because that pawn is pinned by your other bishop. Let's say your opponent tries to be careful and restrict you. He plays pawn to d6 to take control of this square. After you develop your knight, black plays bishop to g4, pinning your knight. It looks like your opponent is totally secure now, right? Wrong, because here you sacrifice one of your Danish bishops. But what is it for? At first, it is unclear what you are aiming for, but the move is very satisfying. Think about it. Black played pawn to d6 to stop you from going forward. Then black pinned your knight, trying to freeze it in place. And yet, you play the move that goes against all the odds, knight to a5. You ignore the pin, you ignore the fact that the knight can be captured. But this move is brilliant because it checks the king. Black cannot capture your knight with the pawn, since that pawn is pinned. If black does capture, the queen is lost. That means the king must move. Once the king steps aside, your knight simply retreats and captures the bishop, and this little combination totally opens up the black king. From here, your plan is simple. Castle, open up the e-file, and win the game. If black tries to develop instead, then after the exchange, the attack continues. Black still cannot recapture with the queen because of your bishop, and as the pawn recaptures, you keep attacking with queen to h5 check. Once again, your Danish bishop strikes with a sacrifice, and thanks to this tactical shot, you are still winning the queen. Of course, your opponent can try some other moves, but it is never easy for them. For example, you can push forward and kick out the knight. If black tries to pin your pawn to stop that, then you respond with a symmetric idea, unpinning your pawn, and finally the knight has to move. You take away all these squares, and therefore the knight has to retreat backward. Now you develop your other knight, black does the same, and boom, he is already in trouble. The queen is forced to retreat and protect the pawn on c7, but then you land your knight on f6, and once again you are winning. Here, black has no choice but to capture the knight one way or another. But the moment they do, you unleash a discovered check. No matter how black tries to cover, you then capture the bishop, and your bishop hunts down the rook and wins the game. And now we get to the favorite part of every Danish Gambit fan, completely dismantling the opponent. Imagine this. Black plays bishop to b4, checking your king. This is actually one of the most common moves. Then black develops the knight to f6, aiming at your pawn and preparing to castle. But it is not going to be that simple. You push your pawn forward, attacking the knight. Your opponent is still optimistic. He sees that the knight can step forward, taking advantage of the pin and attacking your knight. He thinks this wins him time to castle his king to safety. But as always in the Danish Gambit, there is an unpleasant surprise. You sacrifice the bishop on f7. And that is just the first in a long series of unpleasant surprises for your opponent. After the king moves, you continue with queen to b3, delivering a double attack. This is a very common tactical pattern in the Danish Gambit, where you sacrifice a bishop temporarily, And then thanks to this double attack, you win it back on the very next move while also exposing your opponent's king. Now, since black needs to cover the king somehow, pawn to d5 makes a lot of sense. It blocks the diagonal, it solidifies the knight on a 4, and it even opens up a diagonal for the bishop. All of that looks good for black. Your opponent clearly expects you to capture the bishop, but instead, you deliver another surprise. You play the en passant capture, which renews the very same check. Your opponent is annoyed but covers the king once again, and only then are you kind enough to capture the bishop. At this point, the knight in the middle of the board is hanging, but black is fine with that. He captures your knight, definitely expecting you to recapture immediately. But as always in the Danish Gambit, you do not follow the obvious path. Instead, you play queen to f4 check, which is a brilliant idea. The black king has to move, because it cannot be covered. Your bishop controls those squares, just as in other variations. Therefore, once the king moves, you still do not capture the knight. Instead, you play another unexpected move, pawn captures c7. This time it comes with a double attack against the queen and the knight. Moreover, because of the X-ray pressure from your queen, black is forced to keep guarding this knight. The queen cannot simply move away, because then you will promote the pawn and win a huge amount of material. That means the queen must stay somewhere along the back rank. Let's say it slides across to hold position. At this point, your opponent is 200% certain that you are finally going to capture one of the knights. And yet, you still do not. Instead, you play the move that no one would expect, queen to e5. Here you are breaking every classical opening rule. You are ignoring development. Your king is exposed. You are moving the same piece again and again. And yet, your position is completely winning. With queen to e5, you are threatening checkmate. Black needs to find an answer. But the queen still cannot move away, because that would drop the knight on b8, and afterwards the rook would fall, costing a ton of material. So, black looks for a creative solution with bishop to d7, pinning your queen. But now you do the absolute unthinkable. You pin the very piece that pinned you. At this point, everyone is confused, yourself included, and yet, despite all the chaos, you still win the game. So what is the catch here? If black captures your queen with the bishop, that immediately drops the defense of black's own queen, and you capture it with checkmate. But if instead, black captures your queen with their queen, then your queen is no longer pinned, and you are free to continue with checkmate as well. Now, what if black simply trades off their dark squared bishop? After all, that bishop seems to cause a lot of problems, especially if at some point you play queen to b3 and target it. But in fact, that trade is a bad idea for black, because then you get two classical Danish Gambit bishops working together. They become absolutely monstrous, and black has nothing that can really oppose them. So black is still left with the task of guarding the pawn. That responsibility often falls to the rook. If the knight moves, as always, you can push your pawn forward and chase it away. Meanwhile, your queen controls the key squares. If the knight jumps forward again, the same bishop sacrifice comes into play with a very similar idea. This time, you are not playing queen to b3 for the double attack, because there is no bishop sitting there anymore. Instead, you play queen to d5, delivering a similar double attack once the king moves. You then recover your sacrifice piece with interest, grabbing the pawn on f7. Since the king has already moved back and forth, it has lost the right to castle. That means it will remain stuck in the center, and you have an easily winning position. From there, you simply castle, push pawn to a 6, and checkmate the king. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.